The exploration vessel Constellation drifted through the Kepler 4R42 system, with its hull showing marks from 3 years of deep space travel, and Captain Daniel Brooks stood on the bridge watching the viewscreen display a planet that should not exist according to their star charts, and the blue and purple world seemed to pulse with an energy he could not explain. And Lieutenant Amy Carter looked up from her station with wide eyes and said, "Life signs confirmed, and there appears to be a settlement, but they are not responding to our communication attempts." Daniel felt his heart race because the United Earth Space Corps had sent them to chart uninhabited systems, and finding alien life was something that could make or break careers and possibly end lives. And he took a deep breath before saying, "Prepare a landing team and follow standard first contact procedures and make sure we look non-threatening." And Amy nodded while Chief Engineer Marcus Webb started gathering equipment and checking weapons even though they hoped they would not need them. 2 hours later, Daniel found himself standing on alien soil with Carter and Webb beside him, and the air felt thin but breathable. And before them stood a city of crystalline towers that hummed with some kind of energy they could not identify, and the towers caught the light of the system's star and threw it back in rainbow patterns that hurt to look at directly. And Marcus whispered, "This is incredible." And Daniel agreed but kept his hand near his sidearm just in case. A group of beings emerged from the nearest structure, and they were tall, and Daniel guessed nearly 7 feet, with skin that shimmered between blue and violet, and their faces had sharp angles with large eyes that reflected light like mirrors, and they wore flowing clothes that seemed to change color as they moved, and the lead alien raised a hand in what Daniel hoped was a peaceful gesture. And when it spoke, a device on its chest projected words in English somehow and said, "Welcome, travelers, and I am Keeper Valen of the Melodran people, and you have traveled far, and please accept our hospitality." Daniel stepped forward slowly and said, "Captain Daniel Brooks, representing Earth, and we mean no harm. And we were surveying this sector when we detected your settlement." And Valen's expression was hard to read, but his tone seemed warm as he said, "Your kind is new to us, and the waters of space are vast, yet they bring us together, and you must be weary from your journey, so come and share in our refreshment." And Daniel glanced at Amy, who looked nervous but nodded slightly. The Melodrans led them into a grand hall filled with what looked like living plants growing directly from the crystalline walls, and in the center sat a circular table with vessels of clear liquid, and Valen gestured to the seats and said, "Please, share water with us because it is our way of welcoming strangers to our home." And Amy leaned close to Daniel and whispered, "Sir, we should scan that first because unknown compounds could be dangerous." And Daniel whispered back, "If we refuse, we might insult them, so Marcus, do a quick scan." Marcus passed a small device over one of the vessels and said, "Appears to be standard H2O, with trace minerals and nothing toxic registering, and probably safer than what we drink on the ship, honestly." And Daniel nodded and picked up one of the vessels, noticing it felt surprisingly warm to the touch. And the Melodrans each took their own vessels and waited while watching the humans with those strange reflective eyes. And Daniel raised his vessel and said to new friendships across the stars, and Valen replied to the sharing of waters. They drank, and the water tasted pleasant with a slight sweetness and a fizzy quality. And Daniel noticed the Melodrans taking small measured sips as if the liquid was precious, and he did the same, not wanting to seem rude. And Amy said, "This is excellent, and thank you for your hospitality." And Valen's eyes seemed to widen as he said, "You honor us with your acceptance, and now we may speak as kin, not strangers." What Daniel did not notice was how the Melodrans' postures changed from formal to something more alert and almost concerned, and Valen exchanged glances with the others, and a rapid conversation occurred in their own language, too fast for the translator to catch. And then Valen said slowly, "Captain Brooks, may I ask how you find the temperature of our water?" And Daniel blinked at the odd question and said, "Warm and comfortable, and why do you ask?" Another exchange of looks happened among the Melodrans, and one of them, with particularly vivid violet coloring, leaned forward and said, "Forgive us, but we must ask, and your species are carbon-based?" "Yes, and you breathe oxygen, and your world what is its classification?" And Marcus pulled out his datapad and said, "Earth is a Class M planet with nitrogen-oxygen atmosphere, and moderate temperatures and 70% water coverage, and pretty standard for life-bearing worlds in our experience, though our experience is limited." The Melodrans went completely still, and Valen repeated slowly, 70% water coverage, and Daniel said, "Yes, and why is that unusual?" And Valen stood with his shimmer shifting to a deeper, almost purple color and said, "Captain Brooks, our world has 2% water coverage, and water is the most precious substance in our civilization. And wars have been fought for a single reservoir, and a melodran will produce perhaps 3 liters of excess water in their entire lifetime. And the water we just shared with you represented approximately 1/5 of this settlement's monthly surplus." The silence that followed felt crushing, and Amy's face went pale as she said, "We did not know, and we would never have taken it if we understood." And Valen raised a hand, and his shimmer lightened again as he said, "No, you could not have known, and we offered freely. But I must ask Captain Brooks truly, how much water does your species possess?" And Daniel exchanged glances with his crew before saying, "Earth has approximately 1.4 billion cubic kilometers of water, and we pipe it into our homes, and we bathe in it daily, and we use it to grow food and to clean and for recreation, and it falls from our sky regularly." One of the younger melodrans made a sound like a gasp, and another swayed as if dizzy, and the violet female whispered, "It falls from your sky and regularly," and Marcus confirmed yes, and it is called rain, and it happens constantly, and some regions get several meters per year. And Valen sat down heavily with his shimmer fluctuating wildly as he said, "You are water-blessed beyond any species we have ever encountered, and we thought ourselves fortunate to have our 2%. But you have so much more." Daniel felt growing unease as he asked, "I take it this is not normal among spacefaring species," and Valen said quietly, "Captain, most advanced civilizations in this sector of space have water coverage of less than 1%, and the richest worlds we know of have perhaps 5%, and we have fought wars and developed entire technologies and structured our societies around the acquisition and conservation of water, and it is the foundation of galactic economics, and you tell me your people swim in it for pleasure," Amy said weakly. "We do have swimming pools, yes." And another long silence followed until one of the other melodrans said, "This changes everything, and if what they say is true, then Earth is the richest planet in known space, and every species in the sector will want to know about this." And Valen's shimmer darkened as his expression became grave, and he said, "Captain Brooks, I must speak plainly because you have stumbled into a situation far more dangerous than you realize. And if word spreads about your world's water abundance, you will not be seen as explorers or potential friends, and you will be seen as the greatest prize in the galaxy." Daniel felt his stomach drop because he had come seeking knowledge and peaceful contact, but instead, he had just painted a target on humanity's back, and he asked quietly, "What do you suggest we do?" And Valen looked at him for a long moment before saying, "That depends, Captain, and are your people warriors, and can you defend your water world from those who would take it by force?" Daniel thought of Earth's defenses, and they had some military vessels, but nothing designed for interstellar warfare. And humanity was still so new to the stars, and still naive about the dangers that lurked in the dark, and he said, "Finally, we are learning, but honestly, if what you are saying is true, we are not ready for the attention." And Valen stood again and said, "Then we have much to discuss and very little time, because by sharing water with you, and by following our oldest custom, we have created a bond, and we are now kin-bound by the sacred sharing, and kin protect each other, Captain Brooks, even if it means standing against the entire galaxy." Daniel felt the weight of those words settle on his shoulders like a physical burden, because he had come in peace and shared a simple drink, and in doing so had changed the fate of his entire species. And the water ceremony, he realized, had been far more than a gesture of hospitality, and it had been a test and a revelation, and now perhaps the beginning of either humanity's greatest alliance or its greatest war. And he looked at Valen and said, "We need to talk more about this." And Valen nodded gravely and said, "Yes, we do, because time is not on our side, Captain, and the galaxy moves faster than you know." 3 hours after the water-sharing ceremony, Daniel sat in what the Melodrans called a council chamber, though it looked more like an amphitheater carved from living crystal, and Valen had assembled his most trusted advisors and the constellations. Full command team had beamed down to join the discussion, and Commander Lisa Grant leaned toward Daniel and whispered, "The ship's sensors are picking up increased communications traffic from the settlement, and it is encrypted, but the volume is significant," Daniel murmured. They are talking about us, and I cannot say I blame them. And Valen entered from a side passage accompanied by the violet female from earlier, and an elderly Melodrin, whose shimmer had faded to a pale silver. And Valen gestured to the elderly one and said, "Captain Brooks, allow me to properly introduce Council Elder Theron, and this is Ambassador Kira, our liaison to the Galactic Commerce Union." Theron moved slowly and settled onto a raised platform that adjusted to support him. And when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of many years as he said, "Captain, I have lived through 4 water wars, and I have seen civilizations crumble when their wells ran dry, and I have watched species trade their freedom for a single decade's supply of water. And now you tell me your world weeps water from the sky." And Daniel said, "I understand how it must sound." Theron's reflective eyes fixed on him as he said, "Do you truly understand that you have just revealed your species possesses more wealth than the combined treasuries of 50 star systems, and that wars will be planned and alliances forged and broken all before your next sunrise?" And Ambassador Kira stepped forward, with her shimmer pulsing with barely contained anxiety, and said the Galactic Commerce Union has 1,200 member species, and every single one of them struggles with water scarcity, and some more than others, but all of us ration and all of us conserve. And the discovery of even a new aquifer on a frontier world makes galactic news, and you are describing oceans. Marcus cleared his throat and said with respect, "Ambassador, surely there are other water-rich worlds out there, and we cannot be unique." And Kira said, "You are not entirely unique, and there are 3 other known worlds with water coverage above 50%. And would you like to know what happened to them?" And the room went quiet as everyone waited. Kira continued and said the first was discovered 400 cycles ago, and the native species was pre-industrial, and within 2 cycles 5 different empires had established protectorates over the planet, and within 5 cycles the native species was extinct as casualties of proxy wars fought in their skies, and the planet is now divided into extraction zones, each producing enough water to supply dozens of systems, and the native ecosystem has collapsed. Amy's voice was hollow as she asked, and the others and Kira said the second world's inhabitants were space-capable, but militarily weak, and they tried to negotiate and to trade their water peacefully, but the markets collapsed and water became too cheap and too abundant, and entire sectors of the galactic economy destabilized, and within a decade, the water world's inhabitants had been relocated to orbital stations, and their planet was fully industrialized, and they exist as refugees now, scattered across 100 worlds watching their home get drained from orbit. Lisa asked about the third, though Daniel suspected she did not want to know. And Kira's shimmer dimmed as she said the third world species was warrior strong and technologically advanced, and they refused to share and refused to trade and closed their borders and defended their skies, and the war lasted 30 years, and when it ended the world was scorched, and they had deliberately poisoned their own water, rather than let it fall into enemy hands, and billions died on both sides, and the world is quarantined now, and some say it will be habitable again in 1,000 cycles, and some say never. The silence stretched unbearably long, and Daniel finally said, "So those are our options, an extinction or exploitation or mutual destruction." And Valen said firmly, "No, there is a fourth path, and one that has never been attempted because the circumstances have never aligned properly." And Theron made a sound that might have been a laugh and said, "You are going to suggest the ancient compact." Valen said, "I am." And Kira protested that the compact is a myth and a diplomatic fairy tale older than our civilization. And Valen acknowledged perhaps, or perhaps it has simply never been necessary to invoke it until now, and Lisa looked between them and asked, "What is the ancient compact?" Theron settled deeper into his support platform and said, "A legend mostly, and some say a legal framework, and others claim it is a moral philosophy. And the story goes that in the ancient times before the Galactic Union, and before the great empires, there was a species called the Architects, and they established rules for how spacefaring peoples should interact. And most of it is lost to time, but one piece has been preserved in our oldest texts, and the compact of mutual necessity." Daniel asked, "Which says what exactly?" And Theron explained that when 2 species meet for the first time, and one possesses what the other needs for survival, they must negotiate as equals, regardless of technology or power, and the species with the resource cannot be exploited or conquered, and they must be brought into the galactic community as full partners with all rights and protections. Marcus frowned and said, "That sounds reasonable, so why would that be controversial?" And Kira's shimmer flashed with something like bitter amusement as she said, because the compact also states that the species with the resource has an obligation to share it fairly with those in genuine need, and you cannot hoard what others require to live, and it is a two-way street. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine and said, "You're saying Earth would have to give away our water," and Valen corrected. "Not give, but trade and share and participate in the galactic economy as a major supplier, but on your own terms with protections against exploitation, and it has never been invoked because the compact requires both species involved to agree to it, and it must be witnessed by at least 5 neutral parties from different civilizations, and it is considered binding on all signatories to the original charter, which includes most spacefaring species," Kira insisted. "But it is theoretical, and no one has actually tried to enforce it in recorded history, and there is no guarantee the major powers would honor it." And Theron said quietly, "They would, if they feared the alternative more," and all eyes turned to him as he continued. "Think about it, because Earth's water is essential for survival across hundreds of systems, but Earth is also, by your own admission, relatively defenseless, and if word gets out without any framework in place, there will be chaos and a scramble for dominance and wars that destabilize entire sectors. But if Earth enters the galactic stage under the ancient compact backed by witnesses and allies, the major powers have to consider the consequences of violating such an accord, and it would unite every other species against them, and the political cost would be immense," Lisa said flatly. "You are gambling on the kindness of strangers and ancient legal traditions," and Valen replied, "No, we are gambling that the major powers are rational enough to prefer stable trade over chaotic war, and that enough species will support Earth's claim because they also fear what happens if the alternative unfolds." Amy had been quietly working on her datapad, and she looked up with her face pale and said, "Captain, I have been running projections based on the data we have gathered, and if even 10% of Earth's water entered the galactic market in an uncontrolled fashion, it would crash the entire water economy. And trillions of beings depend on the current supply chains and pricing structures, and the economic chaos alone could trigger system-wide collapse in dozens of sectors," Daniel said slowly. "So we are not just a target, and we are a potential apocalypse for their entire civilization." And Theron said, "Which is precisely why the ancient compact might work, because Earth needs protection, and the galaxy needs stability, and the compact offers both if it can be invoked properly." Daniel looked at his command team, then back at the Melodrons and asked what would it require. And Valen stood with his shimmer brightening with determination, and said, "First, Earth must formally agree to participate in galactic commerce as an equal partner, not a vassal or resource to be exploited. And second, you must agree to fair trade practices, meaning you cannot withhold water from those in genuine need if they can offer fair exchange. And third, we need 5 neutral witnesses from different civilizations to observe and validate the compact. And fourth, you need a patron species to sponsor your entry into the galactic community, and someone to vouch for you, and train you, and stand with you if the compact is challenged." Daniel said, "And you are offering to be that patron," and Valen said, "We are, because by sharing water with you, we have already bound ourselves by our own customs, and we cannot abandon you now without dishonoring every principle our civilization holds sacred." Lisa stepped forward and said, "Let me be clear, because you are asking us to make a decision that affects all of humanity, and we are not authorized to agree to galactic treaties, and we are explorers, not ambassadors." And Valen said, "I understand, but time is not our ally, and already rumors spread, and within days, perhaps hours, other species will detect your ship and analyze your biosignatures and investigate your origin, and the moment they trace you back to Earth, the countdown begins, and you need to establish the framework before that happens." Daniel felt the weight of command pressing down on him like never before, and the Melodron settlement transformed over the next 9 days as temporary landing platforms appeared around the crystalline city, and each was designed to accommodate different ship configurations and atmospheric requirements, and Valen's people worked tirelessly coordinating with incoming delegations while maintaining strict information control about why this gathering had been called. On the constellation, Daniel barely slept because his first transmission to Earth had reached the United Earth Space Corps 3 days ago, bouncing through relay stations across light years, and the response had arrived 12 hours later, and it was everything he had feared. And Admiral Patricia Monroe's face had filled his screen with her expression grave as she said, "Captain Brooks, You are telling me that by accepting a glass of water, you have committed humanity to a galactic trade agreement. Daniel had replied, not yet committed, Admiral, but the alternative is likely war and multiple wars, and they have made that very clear. And there had been a long pause as Monroe consulted with people off screen, and when she returned, her voice was steady but tight as she said, "The Security Council is being briefed now, and the Secretary General wants daily updates, and in the meantime, you are authorized to continue negotiations, but sign nothing and agree to nothing binding, because we need time to understand what we are dealing with." Daniel had said with respect, "Admiral, time is the one thing we do not have, and every day we delay the risk of exposure increases," and Monroe's expression had softened slightly as she said, "Daniel, I know you are doing your best in an impossible situation, but you have to understand what you are asking, because you want Earth to reshape its entire economic and political structure to accommodate trade with species we did not know existed a week ago, and that is not a decision any one person can make, not even the Secretary General. But Earth's bureaucracy moved slowly and the galaxy did not. And on day 6, the first witness arrived, and the Kelrathi came in a vessel that looked like a massive flower made of metal petals, and they were insectoid, about 4 feet tall, with iridescent carapaces and multifaceted eyes, and their diplomat, who used the designation Elder Prime, communicated through pheromone translation devices and announced, "We come in neutrality, and the Kelrathi have no stake in water wars, and our chemistry is different, and we observe and witness as requested." 2 days later, the Vorns appeared, and they were aquatic beings who traveled in environmental suits filled with ammonia-based liquid, and their ship was spherical, almost organic in appearance, and Ambassador Girth, their representative, was blunt. "As he said, we hear rumors of a water world, and rumors that concern us because the stability of galactic trade depends on controlled resources, and chaos serves no one." Valen explained, which is precisely why we are invoking the ancient compact, to prevent chaos, and Girth's translator produced a sound like grinding ice as he said, "The compact is tradition, not law, but traditions have power, if enough respect them, and we will witness, but whether we support depends on what we see." The silicates came next, and they were beings of living crystal who communicated through light pulses, and they were followed by the Dreleks, who were energy beings contained in magnetic fields. And finally, the Turians arrived, who were humanoid, but with metallic skin and eyes that glowed with inner fire. Each arrival brought new challenges, including dietary requirements and environmental needs and cultural sensitivities that had to be navigated. But more importantly, each delegation asked the same question in different ways, which was how much water does Earth truly have? And Daniel and his crew had prepared a presentation carefully crafted with Valen's help, and it was factual, but framed to emphasize sustainability and partnership rather than exploitation. On the 8th day, Ambassador Kira pulled Daniel aside after a particularly tense meeting with the Turian delegation and said there is a problem, and the Turians are members of the Iron Compact, which is an alliance of 7 major military powers. And they are here as observers, yes, but they are also gathering intelligence, and I have intercepted communications, and they are asking questions about Earth's location and its defenses. Daniel felt cold dread settle in his stomach and asked, "Can we shut down their communications?" And Kira said, "And violate diplomatic protocols, because that would invalidate the entire gathering. So no, we have to proceed as planned, and hope the compact's protections take hold before the Iron Compact decides to act." That night, Daniel called together his full crew in the Constellation's briefing room, and they were exhausted and stressed and far from home, and he said, "I want everyone's honest assessment, and are we doing the right thing here?" Lieutenant Tom Hayes, the ship's tactical officer, spoke first and said, "Captain, I have been analyzing the defensive capabilities of the ships that have arrived, and any one of them could reduce the Constellation to debris in seconds, and if these are just the witnesses, I do not want to think about what the military powers have, and we need allies, and right now the Melodrons are the only ones offering." Amy nodded in agreement and said, "The xenobiological data I have gathered suggests that water scarcity has shaped every aspect of these civilizations, including their architecture and their biology and their social structures and everything, and they are not going to just leave Earth alone out of the kindness of their hearts, and we need a framework." Lisa asked quietly, "But can we trust them? Because Valen seems genuine, but we are betting humanity's future on the honor of species we met less than 2 weeks ago." And Marcus leaned back in his chair and said, "I have been thinking about this a lot. And what if we just leave and pack up and head back to Earth and tell everyone to fortify and prepare for invasion? And would that be better? Daniel said firmly. No, because they already know we exist and they have scanned our ship and our biosignatures, and they could track us back to Earth, and all we would accomplish is arriving home with enemies on our heels and no allies to help us, and at least this way we have a chance at establishing rules and protections, Amy added hesitantly. There is another factor, and I have been studying the Melodran culture, and the water-sharing ceremony is not just symbolic to them, and it is sacred, and they believe that anyone who shares water becomes family, and Valen was not exaggerating about that, and they are bound by honor to protect us now. And that is not nothing. A knock on the door interrupted them, and it was a Melodran messenger who said, Captain Brooks, Keeper Valen requests your presence immediately because there has been a development. And Daniel followed the messenger to the council chamber with his heart pounding, and when he arrived he found Valen in heated discussion with Elder Theron and Ambassador Kira, and the old Melodran's shimmer was fluctuating wildly, which was a sign of extreme agitation. Daniel demanded, what is wrong? And Valen turned to him, and for the first time since they had met, Daniel saw something like fear in his reflective eyes as he said, another ship has arrived, and they did not request permission, and they did not announce their presence, and they simply appeared in orbit and are demanding immediate audience. Daniel asked, who are they? And Kira's voice was barely a whisper as she said, the Zathran Dominion, and they are one of the Iron Compact's founding members, and they do not send diplomats, Captain, and they send conquerors. Through the chamber's viewing portal, Daniel could see a new vessel in orbit, and it was massive, easily 10 times the size of the constellation, and bristling with weapons and angular armor, and it looked less like a ship and more like a flying fortress, and Daniel asked, how did they find out so quickly? Theron said bitterly, does it matter, because they are here and they will want answers, and a communication signal pierced the chamber, and Valen accepted it, and a holographic image appeared, and the being that materialized was humanoid in basic shape, but covered in metallic scales that reflected no light, and its eyes were pits of darkness, and when it spoke its voice was like metal scraping on stone. The being said, I am War Leader Kron of the Zathran Dominion, and I am here to verify rumors of a water world and its primitive inhabitants, and produce the humans immediately. And Daniel stepped forward, before Valen could respond, and said, I am Captain Daniel Brooks of Earth, and we are not as primitive as you might think. Kron's pit-like eyes fixed on him and said, you share water with strangers, and you reveal your world's greatest treasure to the galaxy. And yes, human, you are exactly as primitive as I think, and the Dominion claims priority rights to negotiate with Earth, and you will accompany me to our homeworld for discussions. Valen interjected, that is not how this works, because these humans are under the protection of the Ancient Compact, and 5 witnesses are gathered, and first contact protocols are being observed, and Kron's image flickered with what might have been amusement as he said, the Ancient Compact, and you invoke children's stories to protect a treasure world, and the Dominion recognizes no such authority. Elder Theron said, moving forward despite his age then, you disrespect the foundations of galactic civilization, because the Compact predates your Dominion by millennia, and it is woven into the original charter, which your own ancestors signed, and Kron said, times change, old one, and the charter was written for a different era, and this is the age of strength, not sentiment. Daniel felt anger rising in him and asked, you are saying might makes right? And Kron replied, I am saying reality trumps tradition, and your world has water and my people need water, and these are the morning of the ceremony arrived with tension so thick it seemed to make the air feel heavy. And the Melodran settlement had prepared a grand amphitheater for the occasion, carved from living crystal that amplified sound and projected holographic displays, and representatives from all 5 witness species had gathered along with delegations from a dozen other civilizations who had arrived in the past 24 hours, drawn by rumors and curiosity. And above it all, casting a shadow both literal and figurative, hung Kron's warship like a constant threat, and Daniel stood in an antechamber adjusting his formal Space Corps uniform, which suddenly seemed inadequate for what he was about to do, and beside him Valen's shimmer pulsed with nervous energy. Valen said, the Elders are broadcasting this across 17 star systems, and by invoking the Ancient Compact publicly, we are forcing the issue, and either the major powers acknowledge it, or they openly reject thousands of years of tradition, and that choice will define them to the entire galaxy. Daniel muttered, no pressure, And Valen said you could still reconsider and refuse to participate and take your chances with Kron's offer. And Daniel met Valen's reflective eyes and asked, would you if you were in my position? Valen's shimmer brightened to almost gold as he said, no, I would do exactly what you are doing, which is why I believe this might actually work. And a chime sounded signaling it was time. They entered the amphitheater together, and the sight that greeted Daniel was overwhelming because hundreds of beings from dozens of species filled the curved seating, and their forms and features were so varied that it was like stepping into a dream, and some were barely visible as energy patterns contained in fields, and others were massive, requiring structural reinforcement just to accommodate their weight, and a few existed in environmental bubbles with their native atmospheres incompatible with the Melodran standard. And at the center of it all, on a raised platform, stood the 5 official witnesses, including Elder Prime of the Kelrathi, and Ambassador Girth of the Vorns, and a silicate named Harmonic Crystal, and a Drelex energy being designated as Flux, and the Turian representative General Vex. Valen's voice rang out, amplified by the chamber's acoustics, as he said, beings of the gathered civilizations, we convene this ceremony of first contact to acknowledge the emergence of a new spacefaring species and to invoke for the first time in recorded history the ancient compact of mutual necessity. A murmur rippled through the crowd, with some sounds excited and some skeptical. And Valen continued, the humans of planet Earth have made contact with our people, and in accordance with our traditions we shared water with them as a gesture of hospitality, and what we discovered shocked us, and what it means will reshape the galaxy. Valen gestured, and the holographic displays flared to life, showing images of Earth spinning slowly with its blue oceans clearly visible, and he said 70% water coverage and more than any other known inhabited world, and Earth is not merely a water-rich planet, but it is a water-blessed paradise whose abundance defies all conventional understanding of resource scarcity. The murmurs turned to gasps and exclamations, and even the witnesses who had been briefed seemed stunned to see the visual evidence, and Valen said, his voice growing stronger, this discovery presents the galactic community with a choice, and we can respond with wisdom, invoking the ancient compact to bring Earth into our civilization as equal partners, or we can respond with greed, turning this moment into the spark that ignites a war unlike any we have known. A voice cut through the chamber, harsh and metallic, saying, enough dramatics. Melodran and Kron strode into the amphitheater flanked by 2 massive Zathran warriors, and his arrival had not been announced, and the breach of protocol sent shocked whispers through the crowd, but no one moved to stop him. Kron continued, you speak of ancient compacts and civilized behavior, but let us speak truths, because the humans are weak and their technology is centuries behind ours, and they have stumbled into the galactic community by accident, not by merit. And they sit on the greatest resource in known space and have no means to defend it, and the Dominion offers them protection and fair compensation, and a place in our sphere. And what do you offer them, Valen, with your pretty words and traditions? Daniel felt his crew tense around him, but he stepped forward before anyone could respond and said, you are right. And Kron's dark eyes swiveled to him and said, what? Daniel said, you are right, and we are technologically primitive and we cannot match your weapons, and in a straight fight we would lose. And he walked forward until he stood face to face with the war leader and said, but you are wrong about one thing, because we are not defenseless. Kron growled empty boasting, and Daniel said, no, a promise, and he turned to face the entire gathering and said, Earth's water could solve the galaxy's scarcity problems, or it could create new ones, and it all depends on how it enters the market. He nodded to Amy, who activated her datapad, and new holographic displays appeared showing complex economic models and supply chain projections. And Daniel continued, my science officer has been running simulations, and if Earth's water floods the market uncontrolled, it would crash the entire galactic economy overnight, and the price of water would plummet, and trillions of beings who have built their lives around water scarcity would see their savings evaporate, and trade routes would collapse, and resource wars would erupt as species who hoarded water reserves suddenly found them worthless, and entire civilizations structured around water collection and purification would become obsolete. More projections appeared showing cascading failures across multiple star systems, and Amy added, taking over the presentation, but it gets worse because water is tied to thousands of other commodities in your economic systems, and crash the water market and you destabilize food production and manufacturing and transportation and everything, and our models suggest it would take decades to recover, and some systems might never recover. Kron snarled, "This is fear-mongering," and Ambassador Girth of the Vorn spoke up with his grinding voice carrying authority as he said, "No, this is mathematics, and I have reviewed their projections, and they are conservative, if anything, and the humans are correct, and uncontrolled access to Earth would be catastrophic." General Vex of the Turians stepped forward and said, "But controlled access regulated through proper channels could benefit everyone, and this is why the Ancient Compact exists, to handle exactly this situation," and Kron insisted the compact is not binding. Daniel said, "Then make it so right here and right now, and the 5 witnesses can formally recognize Earth's claim to sovereignty under the compact, and any species that wants access to our water must negotiate with us as equals, following established protocols, and we will trade fairly and we will share reasonably, but we will not be conquered or exploited." Kron asked dangerously, "And if we refuse?" And Daniel met his gaze without flinching and said, "Then we will make sure no one gets our water, and we will poison it, and we will destroy our own ecosystem before we let it be taken by force, and we will document everything and broadcast it across the galaxy so everyone knows exactly who caused the collapse of the galactic economy." The silence was absolute, and Kron said, but there was uncertainty in his voice now, "You are bluffing." And Daniel reached into his uniform and pulled out a small device and said, "Am I? And this is a dead man's switch connected to our ship. And if I do not deactivate it every 12 hours, it broadcasts a signal, and that signal reaches Earth through quantum communication, and Earth implements a protocol we have been developing since we learned about the situation, and we call it Scorched Ocean." A voice called from the crowd, "You would destroy your own world." And Daniel looked around the amphitheater and said, "To save it from slavery in a heartbeat, and humanity has a saying which is, 'Give me liberty or give me death,' and we mean it, and you can have us as partners or as nothing, and those are your only options." Elder Theron chose that moment to step forward with his aged form commanding respect through sheer presence, and he said, "The human speaks truth, though perhaps more dramatically than necessary, and the Ancient Compact was designed for exactly this scenario, which is a species with vital resources facing pressure from more powerful neighbors, and the Compact provides a framework for integration that protects both the resource holder and the galactic economy, and to reject it now is to reject millennia of wisdom." Elder Prime announced its translated voice firm the Kelrathi witness and affirmed the validity of the compact, and Girth added the Vorn's witness and affirm, and Harmonic Crystal's light pulses translated the Silicate's witness and affirm, and Flux's energy signature pulsed the Drellic's witness and affirm. All eyes turned to General Vex, and as a member of the Iron Compact, his decision would carry immense weight, because if he affirmed the Ancient Compact, it would force the Dominion to consider the political cost of defiance, and if he rejected it, the door would be open for chaos. Vex stood silently for a long moment, and then he spoke and said, "The Turian hegemony recognizes the sovereignty of Earth under the Ancient Compact, and we witness and affirm, and furthermore, any attempt to violate this compact will be considered an act of aggression against the entire framework of galactic civilization, and the hegemony will respond accordingly." The amphitheater erupted in discussion, and Kron's dark eyes blazed with fury, but he was trapped because to attack Earth now would be to openly 3 months later, Earth looked different from orbit because Daniel stood on the observation deck of the newly commissioned ESV Unity, watching construction platforms surround the planet like a metal constellation, and the Unity was Earth's first ship designed with alien consultation incorporating Melodran propulsion systems and Kelrathi sensor arrays and Turian defensive shields, and it was a symbol of everything that had changed. Lisa said, joining him at the viewport, "Still beautiful," and she had been promoted to captain and given command of one of the new exploration vessels being constructed, and Daniel corrected her saying, "More beautiful, because now we know what we are protecting." The past 3 months had been chaotic in ways he could not have imagined, because the revelation of alien contact had sent shockwaves through every human institution, and religious leaders debated humanity's place in the cosmos, and economists scrambled to understand galactic trade systems, and scientists celebrated access to technologies that would have taken centuries to develop independently, and politicians, as always, argued about everything. But slowly and steadily humanity was adapting, and the first trade agreements had been signed and water from Earth carefully regulated and sustainably harvested, had begun flowing to a dozen systems in exchange for technology and knowledge and resources, and the ancient compact, formally recognized by 43 civilizations, now protected Earth from exploitation while ensuring fair trade. It had not been smooth because there had been protests from groups who wanted no contact with aliens, and there had been attempts by some nations to broker separate deals undermining the unified front that Earth needed, and there had been close calls including an attempted raid by pirates who thought Earth was still defenseless. They had learned otherwise when the Melodren defense fleet stationed in Earth's outer system under the Compact's protection clauses had intercepted them and destroyed their vessels, and sent a clear message that Earth was not alone anymore. A young Ensign Daniel did not recognize approached him, and the fleet was expanding so fast that new faces appeared daily, and the ensign said, "Sir Ambassador Kira's delegation has arrived, and they are requesting you join them in Conference Room Alpha." Daniel exchanged a glance with Lisa and said Kira is here, and she did not mention a visit, and Lisa suggested maybe it is about the next phase of integration, because the cultural exchange programs are supposed to launch next month. They made their way through the Unity's corridors past crew members who represented a dozen nations and 3 alien advisory positions, because Earth's fleet was truly international now, united by the simple fact that they were humanity's representatives to the stars. Conference Room Alpha was a blend of human and alien design aesthetics, and Valen was there along with Kira and several other Melodrans Daniel recognized from his time on their world, but there were also others, including species he had only seen in diplomatic briefings. Kira greeted him with her shimmer bright with what he had learned to recognize as excitement and said, "Captain Brooks, thank you for meeting with us on short notice," and Daniel said, settling into a seat, "Always happy to see friends, though I admit I am curious about the surprise visit." Valen leaned forward with his expression serious and said, "Daniel, we have come with a proposition and a warning," and the excitement Daniel had felt dimmed slightly as he said, "That is an ominous combination." Kira said the proposition first, and the ancient compact has worked beyond our expectations, and Earth has integrated into galactic trade smoothly, and water distribution has been stable, and the economic impacts have been managed effectively, and you have proven that humanity can be a responsible partner. Lisa said, "I sense a but coming," and Valen acknowledged, "But this success has attracted attention, and not all of it friendly, because there are species beyond the sectors we have introduced you to, and some are isolationist and will not care about Earth, and others are expansionist and will see opportunity, and a few," he paused with his shimmer darkening, "are dangerous in ways that transcend normal conflict." One of the other beings, who looked like it was made of flowing mercury, spoke through a translator and said, "I am Liquidus of the Mercury Collective, and my people exist at the edge of known space, and we have encountered species that the main galactic powers prefer to forget exist, and one such species has taken notice of Earth." Daniel felt a chill and asked what kind of species, and Liquidus said the harvesters, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop as he continued, "They are not a civilization in any sense you would recognize, and they are a force and a plague, and they move from system to system, consuming resources entirely, and they do not trade, and they do not negotiate, and they simply take everything and move on, leaving dead worlds behind." Lisa asked how many worlds have they harvested, and Liquidus replied, "In the past 1,000 cycles, 17, and all stripped of every usable resource, including water," and Daniel's blood ran cold as he asked, "And they know about Earth?" Kira said quietly, "We believe so, because we have intercepted communications that suggest they are aware of a high-density water world in this sector, and they will not arrive immediately, because the harvesters move slowly, consolidating their fleets and gathering intelligence, and we estimate you have perhaps 2 standard years before they reach Earth." Daniel felt the weight of that timeline and said, 2 years. "And what can we do?" Because the Compact and Valen interrupted. "The Compact protects you from civilized species, but the harvesters are not civilized, and they do not acknowledge any authority, and they have destroyed worlds under similar protections before, and treaties and traditions mean nothing to them." Daniel asked, though he suspected he knew then, "What is the proposition?" And Liquidus answered, "A coalition, and not just the Compact signatories, but a military alliance and species, who are willing to fight and to defend Earth, not just because of trade agreements, but because if Earth falls, the harvesters will be emboldened, and they will see the galactic community as weak, and other worlds will follow." Lisa said flatly, You are asking us to become warriors, and Valen corrected. We are asking you to become survivors because you have proven you can negotiate and trade and integrate, and now you need to prove you can defend what is yours, and not just for Earth, but for the principle that some lines cannot be crossed. Daniel stood and walked to the viewport where Earth hung below, blue and green and beautiful, and he thought about the billions of people down there, most of whom were still struggling to understand that aliens existed, and now he had to tell them that those aliens included species that wanted to strip their world bare. He asked without turning around, what would this coalition look like? And Kira explained, a combined fleet where each species contributes ships and personnel, and Earth would be expected to provide resources including water for the fleet and personnel. For training, and the Meladrins would serve as strategic coordinators, and the Turians would provide military structure, and other species would contribute based on their strengths. Daniel asked, and in 2 years when the harvesters arrive, and Valen said simply, we fight and together, and we show them that this sector of the galaxy is not as easy a target as they thought. Daniel turned back to face them and said, you are asking humanity to go to war, and we have barely achieved peace among ourselves, and we are still learning how to work together. And now you want us to face an existential threat. Liquidus said, with its mercurial form rippling, yes, because the alternative is extinction. And the harvesters do not take prisoners, and they do not leave survivors. And if you are not willing to fight, then everything we have built together and all the hope and progress, it dies with your world. The room fell silent, and Daniel looked at Lisa and saw his own thoughts reflected in her eyes, because this was beyond anything they had signed up for, and beyond anything Earth was ready for. But then they had never been ready for any of this, including first contact and galactic trade and becoming a major player in interstellar politics, and yet they had managed, and they had adapted, and they had survived. Daniel said finally, I need to consult with my government because this is not a decision I can make alone, and Valen said, we understand. But Daniel, time is not our ally, and the harvesters move slowly, but they move inevitably, and every day we delay is a day of preparation lost. Daniel asked, how long do we have to decide? And Kira said, weeks, not months, because the coalition is forming with or without Earth, but it would be stronger with you, and not just because of your resources, but because of what you represent, and a new species rising to defend itself and others, and that is powerful symbolism, and it gives hope. After the meeting concluded and the delegates departed, Daniel and Lisa remained in the conference room, and Lisa said quietly, this is insane, because 3 months ago we were explorers, and now we are being asked to join an interstellar military alliance to fight genocidal harvesters, and how did we get here? Daniel said with bitter humor, we shared a glass of water, and funny how small gestures can have such massive consequences. And Lisa asked, are you going to recommend we join the coalition? Daniel thought about it, and about Earth, and about humanity's place in this new galactic order, and about the responsibility that came with being a water world, and he said, finally, yes, because Valen is right, and if we do not stand up now, we are just waiting for someone to knock us down, and the harvesters are coming whether we fight or not, and at least